Gary, I'd like to introduce our featured speaker for tonight, Gary Udashen. Gary A. Udashen is a senior attorney with the Dallas-based criminal defense group, Udashen Anton. He is a graduate of the University of Texas and SMU Law School. Udashen also serves on the board of the Innocence Project of Texas, where he held the position of board president for 9 years. He is currently litigation chair. In 2014, the publication Super Lawyers recognized Udashen with a pro bono award for his work with the Innocence Project of Texas. Udashen is also a frequent speaker for legal and community groups on a variety of topics, including the causes of wrongful convictions. Udashen is board certified in criminal law and criminal appellate law by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization. He also serves on the Texas PBLS Advisory Committee for Criminal Appellate Law. Among his recognition and awards, Udashen has been named as a Texas Monthly Super Lawyer each year since that designation was created in 2003. Udashen has also been listed in the publication Best Lawyers in America each year since 2006 in the areas of appellate law, white collar defense, and general criminal defense. In 2011, he was named Best Lawyers in America as the Dallas White Collar Defense Lawyer of the Year, and in 2014 was named as the Dallas Criminal Defense Lawyer of the Year. Udashen has also been lead counsel or co-counsel on over 20 exonerations of wrongfully convicted persons. We want to also say a special thank you to the Pre-Law Advising Center at UTD and the Ackerman Center for Holocaust Studies at UTD for their wholehearted support of this educational program. Tonight's program is being recorded and a link will be emailed to you when it is ready for viewing. For information on upcoming programming and to see links for our past programs, please visit our website, www.swjc.org. Please type your questions in the Q&A area or in chat. Thank you to our panelists, Richard Miles, Cynthia Garza, and Mike Ware, for taking time from their busy schedules to join us for this very pertinent topic, and to Gary Udashen for agreeing to be our moderator this evening. Gary, we turn the evening over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you to the Southwest Jewish Congress for your interest in this topic. And I hope that we're able to bring some facts to light for you and to enlighten you on some of the things that we deal with when we're talking about wrongful convictions. It's a real problem in our criminal justice system, but just to give you just a little context to it. I've been practicing law now for 40 years. If you had asked somebody in 1980 when I started, or even 20 years ago when I was still practicing in Dallas County, if there were a lot of people or a significant number of people in prison in Texas or anywhere who were wrongfully convicted, most people would have said no, that maybe it happens every once in a while, but it's not really a major problem. We now know that that is absolutely untrue, that the problems of wrongful convictions, the problems of innocent people in prison is a serious issue that needs to be dealt with and is being dealt with, particularly in Texas. Texas probably more than any other state in the country is grappling with this issue and trying to deal with it. And we're going to talk about some of the things we've been doing in Texas as we go through the program. I want to give you one sobering statistic to think about as we talk about the problem of wrongful convictions. 185 Americans have been wrongfully shown to be wrongfully convicted and sentenced to death. 185 people across the country who were on death row have been exonerated and released. And for every 8 executions of a person in the United States based upon a death penalty conviction, there has been 1 person exonerated off of death row. And that's just to give you an example, just in the capital murder context, of the serious problem we're dealing with. So let me turn to the people that we have with us tonight, and I'm going to introduce them as we go along, but I'll just tell you as a group, Richard, Cynthia, and Mike are among the leading, if not the very leading, people in the state in dealing with this, and you're going to hear from them about their different perspectives. I want to start with Richard Miles. Richard, in 1994, was arrested for a murder that he did not commit in Dallas County. He was convicted in 1995, and he spent the next 15 years of his life in prison fighting his wrongful conviction until he finally was released. Richard's case is one of the most important cases in the criminal jurisprudence of the state as far as wrongful convictions and actual innocence. Court of Criminal Appeals found Richard to be actually innocent, and it was for a variety of reasons: prosecutorial misconduct, erroneous eyewitness identification, false scientific evidence. But his case is a case that we study when we talk about to law student groups and lawyer groups about this. But Richard, really for me, the fact that I have gotten to know Richard and people that are in Richard's position, that's one of the joys of doing this kind of work, because as you will see, Richard is somebody who came out of prison after 15 years and decided to do something to help other people in his position. He's been very actively involved with the activities that we work on dealing with the problems of wrongful conviction. He frequently testifies at the Texas legislature on bills concerning this. He started his own nonprofit, Miles of Freedom, to help other people coming out of prison. And so I want to start the program with Richard and give you an example, a real life example of somebody who's gone through this system and been wrongfully convicted. And so let me introduce Richard to you and just ask Richard to take a few minutes and tell us about his case and his situation. Richard.
Yes, sir. First and foremost, I am super excited to be here. Thank you, Southwest Jewish Congress, Ms. Lynn, Ms. Susan, for pulling this together and getting us on those Zoom calls, the pre-Zoom calls, to get all of that done. And thank you, Mr. Gary, for the introduction. Now, my name is Richard Miles, and I am a Dallas native. I was born and raised in Oak Cliff, and at the age of 19 in 1994, as you heard earlier, I was wrongfully arrested for murder and attempted murder. I was in Oak Cliff, and my friend drove me from Oak Cliff to North Dallas. And as I was walking home, I was picked up by a police officer that was sitting to the side of the road after the helicopters and stuff came to the scene. Needless to say, they handcuffed me, asked me where the gun was, and I told them I didn't have a gun. I constantly told them the gentleman that dropped me off that drove me from Oak Cliff to North Dallas was right around the corner. The police officers told me, hey, when you get downtown, just let them know everything. In the process of us headed downtown, we made a stop at a Texaco, and I later learned that this was the place of a potential of a crime scene. And I was taken out of the car, seeing police lights and everything. Gunshot residue was conducted on my hands, and we can get into that later. But when I got downtown, I gave the detective 5 phone numbers of everybody who I had been with that day. I gave him the guy's number that drove me from Oak Cliff to North Dallas, his mom's number, his girlfriend's number, my friend's number, and my girlfriend's number. The detective left. He stayed gone for about 4 or 5 hours, maybe 6 hours, and he came back and he said, well, Richard, we called your alibis and everybody said that you was with them, but we have a witness that said they saw you kill one person and shoot another person. This was the first time that I had even heard of the actual allegations that I was arrested for. So needless to say, I was escorted to New Sterrett County Jail, bond assessed at $350,000. And that was the first time that I was able to call my mother to tell her the situation that I was in. Stayed in the county jail 17 months, assigned a court-appointed attorney. I probably talked to him maybe about 4 times out of the 17 months. The evidence particularly that came out, it was 10 witnesses. 9 of them said I was not the shooter. All of my alibis came to testify. Fingerprints at the scene of the crime wasn't mine. No gun was ever found. One guy that was actually shot but lived testified that I did not look like the shooter, nor did my physical description or clothing match. I was ultimately convicted upon one person that identified me as the shooter, and we later found out that it was a one-on-one tainted identification that brought about that in-court identification. And a gunshot residue test that came back positive in the palm of my right hand, negative anywhere else. 15 years later, we would retest that evidence, and that evidence would be negative. And so I was eventually convicted though, and I was given a total of 60 years in the Texas Department of Corrections. And that's when I was escorted to the Cofield unit, where I would spend the next 13 years of my life, writing different institutions, meeting other innocent people in prison, and eventually connecting with Centurion Ministries by way of a friend, Ben Spencer. And Centurion was the organization that really jumped on my case. And just real short as I close it out, as Mr. Gary Udashen was saying earlier, during my time of incarceration, I filed my own writ of habeas corpus after my direct appeal was denied. My father and I filed a Freedom of Information Act to the Dallas Police Department to get my police records because we could not afford my transcripts. Got my police records in 2002. There wasn't a lot of evidence in it that I could use to substantiate my claim of actual innocence. Fast forward 2007, Centurion gets the case, purchases my transcripts and my police records. I get them in my cell, and after I read my transcripts, I pulled out the police records. And the first couple of pages that I read really blew my mind, because it was a report in the police records that was received way before I went to jury trial from a young lady who was telling them who actually did the crime that I was arrested for. She went into details about him, who he was with, what type of gun he had, and this was never turned over into trial. Not only was that piece of evidence in my police file, but 2 other pieces of evidence was in the police files. Needless to say, that began the key, and I would walk out of prison in October of 2009, and I will be fully exonerated after extra work in February of 2012.
Thank you, Richard. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to have more questions for Richard about his case, and I'll try to get to those later in this hour. Let me turn now to Mike Ware, and let me tell you just a little bit about Mike. Mike is currently the executive director of the Innocence Project of Texas, the organization that I'm on the board on. He's a longtime practicing criminal defense attorney from Fort Worth. When Craig Watkins was elected as Dallas County District Attorney and took office in 2007, he hired Mike to come to the Dallas District Attorney's office to start the first conviction integrity unit within a district attorney's office. And we're going to talk more about conviction integrity units as we go through the evening. But I want to focus with Mike on his work with the Innocence Project of Texas. Mike was one of the founders of the Innocence Project of Texas. And then after he served his stint in the district attorney's office conviction integrity unit, he came back and rejoined the Innocence Project of Texas board and now serves as our executive director. So I just want to let Mike tell y'all about the Innocence Project of Texas, Innocence Projects generally, what we do and how that whole process works.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank everybody for joining us tonight. and for having me on the panel. It's really an honor to be here. The Innocence Project of Texas, I co-founded back in 2006. It's a nonprofit. We survive on donations, and we're primarily a legal service organization, and we're focused on identifying and people who have been wrongly convicted, people who are actually innocent, who, even though they're actually innocent, gone through the system and been convicted, and have gone through their appeals, and they're in prison, even though they didn't do it. So we have the formidable task of identifying those individuals, mostly in Texas, mostly state prisons, but not everybody. We've taken some federal cases out of the state of Texas. And then we identify them, we investigate their cases and further vet their cases. And then ultimately we litigate them in the courts in post-conviction proceedings. We do that, all of that at no cost to the individual themselves or their families. Like I say, we survive on donations. We often have to pay for experts and DNA tests, investigators and such. And so we identify, investigate, and litigate actual innocence cases in the effort to get people who didn't do it exonerated and out of prison. We also engage in policy work, primarily at the legislature every other year when they meet. We sometimes draft, but oftentimes appear and testify on behalf of bills that we hope will either make the system more just and I guess make it more difficult for the state to convict so many innocent people by making the laws more fair and just, and also to make the laws more fair and just for people who have been convicted, such that they don't face so many procedural obstacles in their efforts to become exonerated. So primarily, that's what we do. We work to exonerate completely innocent people, such as Richard, and we work to make the laws more just and fair so that so many innocent people don't get convicted in the first place.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And we're going to come back some more to the work of the Innocence Project of Texas in a moment. Let me introduce Cynthia Garza to you. And I can't really say enough good things about Cynthia Garza. And when I tell you a little bit about her background and you hear what she has to say, you understand why I say that. Cynthia graduated from SMU Law School and started her career as a criminal defense lawyer like Mike and I. But after a couple of years, she went to the work of the Dallas County District Attorney's Office, primarily handling appeals. And this was during the time that Mike was the head of the Conviction Integrity Unit. And Mike spotted Cynthia among the 150 or 200 prosecutors in that office and asked her to come and join his division and work with him doing conviction integrity work. And she is now the chief of the Conviction Integrity Unit of the Dallas County District Attorney's Office. One thing that's really important to know about Cynthia is that conviction integrity units began in Dallas County. We had the very first one. Mike started the very first one, but they've spread around the country now. But Cynthia is the longest tenured, most experienced conviction integrity unit prosecutor in the country. So she is frequently called upon to speak to groups, to give advice to people starting conviction integrity units in district attorneys' offices. And she's just doing an outstanding job working for John Crusoe, the current district attorney, as the chief of his conviction integrity unit. And so I keep talking about conviction integrity units. I want to let Cynthia tell you about conviction integrity units, what they are, what they do, and how they work in the system to help exonerate innocent people. Cynthia?
Thank you, Gary, and thank you to the Southwest Jewish Congress for having me on this distinguished panel, and thanks to all the audience members who are tuning in. So yes, the Conviction Integrity Unit in Dallas started in July of 2007 under the leadership of then District Attorney Craig Watkins. So he brought Mike Ware on to the District Attorney's team to lead the unit. And I had the pleasure of working with Mike in the unit. And at the time when the unit started, there was a lot of pushback from individuals within the office and outside of the office that said, you know, Craig Watkins, why is he starting this Conviction Integrity Unit? Isn't that the job of the defense attorney? Isn't that the job of the Innocence Project or some other organization or some other entity besides the District Attorney's Office to look into cases to determine whether or not someone is wrongfully convicted or is actually innocent? So there were a lot of questions surrounding that. And the answer to that was, it is the duty of the District Attorney's Office, it is the duty of the state to seek justice, not to seek convictions. And how is it justice to have people wrongfully convicted behind a conviction that the District Attorney's Office sought? So Craig Watkins forged ahead with the idea of the Conviction Integrity Unit. And after our unit started and became very successful, other jurisdictions around the country and around the state started looking at Dallas and saying, hey, you know what, maybe we should start something like that. Maybe we should look into whether or not our convictions have integrity, just like Dallas has done. And all around the nation, to this day, they are popping up in various states. Most of them, most states do not have a Conviction Integrity Unit. There are some states that have multiple Conviction Integrity Units within their jurisdiction. And then there's another concept that's kind of catching on around the country, and that is that Conviction Integrity Units are also being formed at the state level. So those states that may not have enough, I guess, funds to get Conviction Integrity Units in various jurisdictions, perhaps because there's a lot of rural counties or what have you, they're starting kind of a statewide type of Conviction Integrity Unit. But I've got to say that in the 14 years that this unit, that our unit in Dallas has been around, we have had in total many exonerations around that, you know, that have gotten attention around the country. Since 2001, Dallas has had 41 exonerations, and people look at Dallas and think, wow, there were a lot of bad prosecutors in Dallas. Dallas was just a really bad place. And the reality is that there are people that are wrongfully convicted all around the nation and all around the country and in the world, really. So this concept of conviction integrity is something that is sometimes foreign to some people if they haven't been really paying attention, but it's something that is so important for district attorneys' offices to have. And conviction integrity units, although we are part of the district attorney's office, we don't operate in the same kind of adversarial way that that you would normally think of the district attorney's office prosecuting cases. We collaborate in case investigations, and we, you know, seek the same answers. What is the truth, right? We seek the truth so that we could seek justice and correct an injustice if there has been one.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia, and we'll come back to discuss that a little bit more. I'm going to go back to Richard now, but let me give a little bit background on what I want to talk about. As Mike mentioned, the Innocence Project of Texas works on legislation, which means every 2 years we have a legislative agenda of bills that we are promoting and supporting at the legislature. The district attorney's office does the same thing. This last session was not a good session for bills related to criminal justice reform, but there was one bill that passed, and this was really a bill that really originated with the Dallas County District Attorney's Office, but it's called the Richard Miles Act. and it was passed by the legislature, and it's named after Richard Miles. And I want to talk about it a little bit. So I'm going to ask Richard first to tell you about it. And then after Richard talks about it, I'm going to let Cynthia talk about it from the prosecutor standpoint, because it really affects how prosecutors work. But Richard, you want to tell them why it's named after you and what the point of the whole bill is?
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. And, you know, I think I will start off with, as a body of people, we have to understand that change starts at the bottom and is oftentimes reinforced at the top, right? So communities organize, they come together and they begin change. And once that change starts moving, then we want the tops to be supportive of that change that's coming about. Ever since I've been out, the legislative process has always been a part of my narrative, all the way back to the conversations that we had to begin working with and connecting with Mr. Corey Sessions and other people that introduced us to Austin, Texas. In 2019, I got a call from District Attorney John Cruzo and Representative Anchia about this idea that first and foremost, when you look at wrongful convictions, everybody points the finger at the prosecutor, right? But the challenge in a wrongful conviction is every person that touches that case potentially contaminates or taints the case. So it's not just the prosecutor where you should allow positions of accountability and transparency. You have the arresting officers, you know, you have the detectives, you have the police officers, investigators, and so forth. And how can we begin to identify areas of gaps and produce legislations that provide a cover for that gap? And so the Richard Miles Act is legislation that identifies the gap of transparency as it relates to police officers or law enforcement during the time of investigation. Anytime evidence is brought forth during that time of investigation, the Richard Miles Act requires a police officer to make sure all of that evidence is pulled together and is handed over to the district attorney's office, as well as signed saying, hey man, I attest that all of the information, all of the evidence is within these files and it's at full disclosure to the DA's office. This was something that was not done in my case and was identified by the DA's office and representatives, and this is what we pushed for. We were not successful in 2019, and so when 2021 came, that's when we went back in, and that's when I learned that the bill would be named after myself. Obviously, I wish I would have went to college and got a bill named after me, you know, something of a collegiate accomplishment, but it was because of the wrongful conviction. And I think going down to Austin and being transparent with our legislators, which yielded this opportunity for it to be named after me.
And Richard, just to add to that, Richard's a very effective advocate at the legislature, that when he goes and testifies to committees and when he meets one-on-one with legislators, he's one of the best advocates for these on these issues that we have. Cynthia, since this is a bill that really relates to the work you do and that the district attorney's office does, tell us how this is going to work in practice. What's it going to do different as far as what you're going to be doing?
Right. So yes, the Richard Miles Act, I do want to say that it got passed the second time we went to introduce it. Remember, Richard, we had gone down to advocate for its passage. And the district attorney's office through District Attorney Cruzo is committed to criminal justice reform and conviction integrity work. So the idea behind the Richard Miles Act is to make sure that our discovery laws and the Richard Miles Act work in tandem. So the district attorney's office, the state, if you will, We have to turn over information that is in our files over to the defense when we're trying a case. And in order to ensure that we have everything that has been collected by the police department during an investigation, that's the purpose of the Richard Miles Act, to give that confirmation to the district attorney's office that everything that is in the police file has been given over to the state, the prosecutor, so that we can make the appropriate disclosures under our discovery laws. And so the idea is to make sure that everything works in tandem. We have been working very hard with our local police departments here in Dallas County to ensure that that the proper forms are being used and everything like that. And you know, our police departments are taking this very seriously. They understand the Richard Miles Act and how it works in practice for us.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. Let me go to Mike now, and let's just go back to the general issue of wrongful convictions. And from your work, both as the executive director of the Innocence Project of Texas and the first conviction integrity unit prosecutor in the country, could you just give us an overview of why people get wrongfully convicted?
Well, there's different reasons, and you know, it's just a lot of it is how deep do you want to go. But I think the common list of reasons would start off with mistaken eyewitness identification, and that's because people who get on the stand and mistakenly identify the defendant as a person they say they saw commit the offense is very powerful testimony, and juries can relate to it and juries believe it. So many times in these wrongful convictions, though, that is what is at the root. That was true in Richard's case. Richard had an alibi, a good alibi, and we see that often in the exonerations. We go back and that person had for some reason, juries never, ever, ever believe alibis. They didn't in Richard's case, even though it was true. Really, though, at the heart of most mistaken eyewitness identifications is some form of police misconduct. It's not just an innocent mistake on the part of the witness. Most often, not always, but most often, it comes about because the police have already decided who they want to convict. Maybe they have a good reason, maybe they don't, but they've decided who they want to convict, and they put a picture of that person in a photo spread, and they, one way or another, convince the witness that the person that they know is the suspect in the photo spread is the person they saw commit that offense. Most often, people will do what the police pressure them to do and then believe that they are doing the right thing, and they go to court and they testify accordingly, and the wrong person is convicted. Another less easy to understand but common cause of wrongful convictions are false confessions. I mean, most people think, I would never confess to anything I didn't do. But surprisingly, it's fairly common in false convictions. In some of the DNA exonerations, where we have not only exonerated the person who was wrongfully convicted, but identified the actual perpetrator, there has been a wrongful confession. The police honestly learn training techniques to get people to confess. In the process, sometimes they get innocent people to confess. And, once someone has confessed, most of the time that case is over with. That's done. That's the case. There's junk science, maybe some kind of new science like dog sniff lineups, and judges let it in until it's exposed to be junk science. There's bite mark comparison, which was big for a while until it was exposed as junk science. there's other kinds of pseudo forensic evidence that has a shelf life usually of about 5 to 7 years before it's exposed as being the junk science that it is. And in the meantime, there's 5 or 7 years of potentially innocent people who've been convicted on the basis of the junk science. And so that's part of our job at the Innocence Project of Texas, is to go back and try to identify those people and exonerate them. I honestly, and I have to be honest here, I think that people who really study wrongful convictions that will say at the root, the most common cause of wrongful convictions is some form of police and prosecutorial misconduct.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Richard, I want to go back to you for a question. And the question is, we all speculate, as do a lot of people, about how many innocent people are there in prison. And, you know, you spent 15 years there for something you didn't do. And I think you mentioned that you met other innocent people while you were there. So what I want to ask you is, just from your experience being there, what percentage of people there do you have a sense really are innocent and shouldn't be there?
Yes, sir. That's a good question, and I think speculations is well worth considering that answer. I'm going to go, when I walked on co-field unit, I oftentimes talk about Ben Spencer, who is the most was one of my best friends, and he was the first person that I met that was actually innocent on co-field. But outside of Ben Spencer, Ben sent me to the law library where I filed my writ of habeas corpus, and that's where I met a guy named Ricky Wyatt. Ricky Wyatt was a writ writer. Ricky Wyatt was also innocent. He's been released, did over 30 years. I met Johnny Pinchback, Andre Courage, Christopher Scott, Victor Thomas. I met probably about 15 or 20 people on one unit, and they were all innocent. And mostly all of those people have been released since I encountered them. And so the question is, you know, what percentage, before I answer what percentage, what I believe, I'm going to say that there are 3 forms of a wrongful conviction, right? Mr. Mike Ware spoke about the evidence, but when I think about the people that I've met in prison, you have the person that is wrongfully incarcerated and will stop at nothing. They're going to jury trial because they are innocent. And for whatever reason, they are found guilty by virtue of the jury trial, but they're innocent. That's one person. You also have a person who, as Mr. Mike Ware was speaking of, they were actually coerced, you know, during the actual investigation. You know, we've seen cases where they interrogate a person 5, 6, 7 hours, and the person just tells the detective whatever they want to hear, just to end that particular phase of their time at being incarcerated or held. And then you have the person that has a background but does not want to go to jury trial, because potentially it's oftentimes told to them, hey, well, you have this type of case, and if you go to jury trial, you're going to end up getting 40, 50, 60 years. And so they end up signing on cases that they didn't do because they're afraid to go to jury trial. And I think that that's a bad place for us to be as a nation, when people are fearful to go to jury trial, which is supposed to be the anchor of our justice system, right? And so when you take those 3 different individuals, I'm going to say about 10% of our prison population is potentially innocent.
Richard, while we're talking, let me just ask you, just as a general question for people who don't work in this system, but who are interested in what they can do to help avoid wrongful convictions as an ordinary citizen of Dallas County. What would you tell them? What can people do?
Yeah, you know, I think the first thing, when we get into this space of criminal justice reform, People look at this as a one size fits all, but you really have to break it down and figure out what area of criminal justice reform do you want to engage in consistently? Is that the investigative stage? Do you want to make sure that the evidence is collected right? Do you want to make sure that the person, all the evidence that's captured or taken in is transferred right? Do you want to deal with the investigation stage? Do you want to be one of those jurors that really understand what reasonable doubt is? The average juror during Ville d'Or, when they go into the courtroom, honestly, in the subconscious of their minds, they've already convicted the person that's sitting beside the lawyer. And no evidence has been talked about yet, but the fact that we have a trust system in our judicial system, it's by subconscious thought that this person is guilty. And I'm just coming here to hear the case and see how much time I'm going to give them. And so my encouragement to people that want to engage more into the system is, first, we have to remove the mental models that we have about people that are arrested and potentially suspects of a crime. And we have to make sure that the court systems do their job to move beyond a reasonable doubt within the courtroom. And secondly, when you hear of cases that a person is wrongfully convicted and they are released, I would ask that that particular thing is not challenged. One of the most hurtful things for me in my transition was when I got out and people still seemed to feel like I was guilty. Even after the courts has did everything and my case is in the law books, it's ex parte Richard Miles, I always have to prove my innocence. And so I'm always reliving a wrongful conviction. And that's very, very hurtful, because at some point you would think that people would snap to say, you know what, people do make mistakes. Police officers make mistakes. Lawyers make mistakes. And so my plea is that we just begin to look at the law with open eyes and not blindfolds.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Let me go to both Mike and Cynthia with this question, and to Cynthia with the Conviction Integrity Unit and Mike with the Innocence Project of Texas. Can you give us some sense of how many cases you look at in your groups and organizations, and what are you looking for in order to decide that this is a case we can work on and maybe do something about? Cynthia, why don't you go first?
So Gary, I think we have an ebb and flow in our intake when we have an exoneration, for example, we get usually more intakes close to around that time. But I will say on average, we have about 250 requests per year to review cases. However, in the past maybe couple of years, we had a lot more, like 300, 400, I think one of those years. And so what we are looking for is, you know, if you look at this case, you know, is there anything that supports this person's claim, right? And is there any backing of the law to that claim? Because obviously, when you have a conviction in Texas, even if the prosecutor, for example, agrees that somebody is actually innocent, that in and of itself does not undo a conviction. You must present that case to the trial court that convicted the individual. And then if that trial court makes a recommendation for relief to grant the person a new trial, that recommendation goes up to the Court of Criminal Appeals, and the Court of Criminal Appeals reviews the case de novo. So they can either agree with the trial court and all the parties, or they can disagree and deny relief. And so in Texas, it's a multi-layer, multi-step process. So when we're looking at a case, we also have to keep in mind, is there some sort of legal backing to this type of case? And so we get intakes from various sources. We get requests from individuals, from their family members. We get requests from internal, if prosecutors may refer cases over to us, or you know, we also have an agreement with our appellate division in our office. So we are separate and apart from our appellate division. The conviction integrity unit is. We are not linked to our appellate division. And so if anybody files an appeal that that alleges actual innocence, the writ section is to forward those writs over to the CIU so that we could take a look at it and have the ability to say, we want to take this case. And we've actually had one exoneration based on that process. So we have various ways that we get our cases, and it's an ebb and flow. 250, maybe 300 to give you a good average of cases that we look at per year.
Hey, Mike, why don't you answer that same question as far as the Innocence Project of Texas goes?
Well, we, you know, get, I don't know, hundreds of letters every month. And, you know, there's a whole lot wrong with the criminal justice system over and above convicting innocent people. You know, there's, you know, mass incarceration. There's people who maybe they're not innocent, but were over sentenced. You know, they got way too much time than than the crime or their personal situation really merited. I personally think there's laws on the books that people go to the penitentiary for that shouldn't be laws in the first place, and in many states aren't laws. But that aside, what we look for are people who are actually innocent. And by that, I mean someone such as Richard, where the crime probably pretty much happened as the witnesses, the police, and the prosecutors say it happened. It's just Richard didn't do it. They got the wrong person. The other kind of actual innocence is where there was never a crime at all. The crime has no existence outside the printed words on the indictment. Someone who is convicted of arson based on a fire that it turns out wasn't even an arson. And so there was no crime. And anybody who died in the fire did not die as a result of the arson. So what I really look for, I look for someone who has a plausible, credible, alternative theory or alternative narrative of innocence that makes sense. And that can either be proven or disproven through investigation. You know, if someone, and it, you know, of course, some people, you know, it's difficult because some people are not as good as expressing themselves as others. Some people don't even speak English. But if someone can articulate what to me is a credible alternative narrative of innocence, maybe one that makes a whole lot more sense than the ones that the prosecutors were peddling at the trial, those are the cases that interest me. And those are the cases that we have some chance of prevailing on, because that alternative narrative of innocence can either be, you know, almost like the scientific method. It can be either proven or disproven through investigation.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And Richard, we had somebody that wrote in a question for you, and I think it's a good question. They wanted to know why you were released from prison several years earlier, and then it took several years before you were actually exonerated. So you want to explain how that came about?
Most definitely. So the first thing is my case was the first non-DNA challenge for the state of Texas, particularly in Dallas. The evidence that was produced by Centurion and my attorney, Cheryl Watley, in 2007, before I walked out of prison, was enough to give the courts an idea and factual idea that they had the wrong person incarcerated. The catch was the actual innocence claim, right? We did not want my case to be dismissed for constitutional violations or anything like that. And so when I walked out of prison It was to push for the actual innocence claim, but it was also further investigation. And so when I walked out in 2009, pretty much the only thing that the Centurion Ministries had was the Brady violation, which was the evidence that was within the police files that was not turned over, that identified the actual person that did the shooting. But when I got out, the Conviction Integrity Unit, Mr. Russell Wilson, Mike Ware, they began to do their further investigations. And this yielded the person that testified against me. They found out that he was actually coerced by the prosecutor to testify against me. The young man actually signed an affidavit in 2010 stating that fact. The Conviction Integrity Unit found out that the gunshot residue test was not positive. The young lady from Swift, Centurion found that out. But the young lady signed an affidavit stating that my hands were not positive. And the fingerprints that was found scene of the crime, they actually traced those fingerprints back. And so it was a lot more investigation that was done even after I got out that really solidified a claim of actual innocence in 2012.
Okay, thank you, Richard. And another question, another good question that somebody wrote in was, what percentage of exonerations are the defendants and the accused Black, and particularly Black men? Now, I know the answer is the vast majority, but I'll ask Cynthia, maybe you have more statistical analysis of the breakdown on that you can give us.
Gary, I'm afraid I don't have a good statistic on that, but yes, the vast majority of the exonerees are Black men. And, you know, there's hardly any women. There are women that have been exonerated, but there's not very many. As well as other racial groups. There's, you know, Caucasian individuals who have been exonerated, and individuals from different racial groups, but the vast majority are Black men.
And let me ask you another question, Cynthia, while we have you. Dallas County has had more DNA exonerations than any county in the country. And can you tell us why that is?
So our lab, the Swift's lab, our county lab, kept a bunch of evidence around, and they didn't destroy it. So I always say that it is two-part reason, right? The lab kept the evidence, but there was also a district attorney who was willing to test the evidence, because you can have evidence laying around anywhere, but you won't have the agreement of the state, or you're going to have to fight the state to get that evidence tested. And so in Dallas County, that wasn't the situation. There was evidence around, and the district attorney's office was able and willing to move forward with DNA testing. Currently, I will say this, currently we have a grant from the federal government in the CIU that funds one prosecutor, one investigator, and one support staff that is dedicated to conviction integrity cases that only look at DNA. So there are still a lot of DNA cases around. And so we do have a grant that pays for that and pays for the testing.
Okay, thanks, Cynthia. And Richard, I want to make sure I get this question asked before we run out of time. I mentioned that you had started a nonprofit called Miles of Freedom. Will you just tell us about Miles of Freedom?
Yes, sir. Miles of Freedom is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that was started right after my full exoneration in 2012. We've been doing this work for 10 years now in South Dallas. Our primary mission is to provide holistic services for individuals, families, and communities impacted by incarceration. And so we've worked with over 1,500 men and women returning home from prison to assist them with everything from securing their state IDs to building a robust resume to employment assistance and housing. We also have a shuttle service that connects family members to visit their loved ones in the Tennessee Colony area prisons, because we do believe that visitation reduces recidivism. In 2019, we kicked off a food distribution working with the North Texas Food Bank, where we provide food to individuals that are experiencing food insecurity. And we distributed over 2 million pounds of produce working with the North Texas Food Bank and other partner and collaborators in Dallas. And so I oftentimes tell people, Mr. Gary, that I did not start Miles of Freedom because I was wrongfully incarcerated. I started Miles of Freedom because I was incarcerated and I experienced the lack of rehabilitative resources. You know, my first job was working in the fields, you know, for no pay. And so when you take a person and isolate them and then let them go after 10, 15, 20 years with a $50 check, I mean, success is not something that's guaranteed. And so Miles of Freedom wants to be there to make sure success is at least a possibility.
Okay, thank you, Richard. And we're about to run out of time, but I have one last question I want to ask Mike about this. Is that I mentioned at the beginning of the program that Texas is leading the country in a lot of ways in dealing with these issues. But I think one point that needs to be made is Texas is like two different states, is that every major county in the state has a conviction integrity unit. But I know, Mike, you've had experience just like I have had when you leave the major counties in the state and you go into smaller counties. You had an experience in Bell County. I had a similar experience way out in West Texas and Pecos County. It's different. And so how is it different dealing with prosecutors and judges when you get out of the major urban counties?
Well, I don't know how to say this kindly, but you know, I mean, it starts. I'll be as diplomatic as I can. It starts with the attitude. You know, we are not going to take a case to litigation, to actual litigation, unless we know this person is innocent. And unless we have the strong evidence supporting our claim of innocence for this individual. And sometimes when you get into the less urban counties, they don't care about the truth, or maybe they don't understand that there is such a thing as the truth. All they want to do is be right and prove you wrong. And you know, that's kind of their attitude. There's not, you know, this attitude as Cynthia talked about. Let's look at this objectively and let's discover what the truth is. Let's go on this truth-seeking mission together. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, you know, but let's test the DNA. And the DNA is going to say whether we're wrong or whether you're wrong. Let's do that. And there's just not that willingness to do that sort of thing. There's a lot more closed-mindedness and less receptiveness to the concept that maybe they made a mistake that in all fairness should be corrected. Instead, there is more of a belligerence and we're right, you know, get out of our courtroom sort of attitude.
Well, and the fact that we have in Dallas County Cynthia Garza to work with, and Mike used to have that position, and we have people like that in the big counties, and there are major counties around the country that have people running conviction integrity units that have that attitude, certainly doesn't mean that this is a problem that is solved. And the examples that Mike is giving of dealing with people in the smaller counties, that's how most of the country still is, frankly. So we have a lot of work to do. So I want to just end by thanking everybody for your interest in this topic. It's such an important topic. I hope you learned something, and I think all of the websites for all of us have been put up on the screen. So reach out to us if you want to volunteer or get involved, and we really appreciate you joining us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.